A former movie star, now he is one of the most beloved animals in the world. But there's a reason they're called killer whales.
They're the top predator of the food chain in the oceans. It's probably one of the top predators that's ever lived, and we know virtually nothing about them.
Now he's been returned to the waters off Iceland, where he was captured nearly 20 years ago.
It's going to be so fascinating to see what happens if a pod of killer whales comes in and to the net, or you know, he can hear them and how he's going to react.
Tonight, an incredible journey. Keiko comes home. The problem with movies that are loosely based on real events is that movies are usually produced to be entertaining, and real life is sometimes rather depressing. Hollywood's dream factories tend to resolve that dilemma by fiddling with reality, and so it was that Keiko, a real killer whale captured at a very young age, became the subject of a very popular movie in which not only its name but its fate was altered. In Hollywood's version, Keiko became Willie. And Willie, in a dramatic computer-assisted finale, leaped to freedom and a presumptive life of whale happiness. That was not what really happened. Still, movies can be powerful engines for change, and when it became public knowledge that the real Willie, that is Keiko, was still moldering in a miserable tank, reality actually improved on fiction. Real people raised some real money, put it in the hands of real experts, and drafted a fresh chapter in Keiko's story. You probably heard or read about it a few weeks ago when Keiko was flown from an interim home in Oregon to a gigantic sea pen in a secluded bay off the coast of Iceland. There it was hoped he would recover not only his health and strength, but also some of the natural skills that killer whales require to be able to lead a normal life. Did it work? How's he doing? Those are some of the questions we'll be answering tonight after our correspondent, Judy Muller, fills in the details of the first few chapters of Keiko's extraordinary adventure.
Keiko, an orca or killer whale, has not been this close to freedom in 20 years. He has spent most of those years performing tricks for paying customers. But here in this bay pen in Iceland, Keiko is preparing for the most challenging trick of all, returning to the wild and making it on his own, something that's never been done with a captive killer whale.
This is an incredible adventure, and we have an opportunity to learn a lot about this animal and the species of killer whales and the marine environment that they live in.
Keiko's dramatic journey began when he was captured at the age of 2 off the coast of Iceland, eventually ending up at a water park in Mexico City.
When we brought Keiko here, we did it with the intention of having something very different in Mexico, and to give the opportunity to the Mexicans that cannot go out to know an animal like this.
But while Keiko grew into a big moneymaker for the park, he also grew too big for his tank. The too warm water in the too small pool resulted in a listless animal with health problems. Forced to swim in endless circles, his dorsal fin drooped. He was seriously underweight, and he developed lesions from a skin virus. And it's entirely possible Keiko would have stayed that way had it not been for this.
He's really doing it.
Keiko starred in the 1993 hit film Free Willy, which tells the story of a killer whale separated from his family, forced to perform tricks in an amusement park, and liberated by a young boy. With the exception of that computer-generated leap to freedom, the film hit uncomfortably close to home when it was revealed that the star of the film was in much the same pickle as the character he played. A high-profile rescue campaign was launched. Animal activist groups targeted children worldwide.
See this information on the back? We want you to send this.
The kids got the message, and so did their parents.
I think they should be free because they look prettier out in the sea.
Warner Brothers included an 800 number on its Free Willy videos aimed at raising money.
You can order the Keiko adoption kit and become a part of Keiko's family.
The publicity brought news media from all over the world, including us, to Mexico City. Why can't Keiko go back to the ocean?
Well, I don't think Keiko or any other animals that are in captivity can go back to their natural environment. It won't survive.
A number of experts on orca behavior disagreed.
That is Sitka with a real classic line.
Paul Spong, who studies orcas around Vancouver Island, has documented that each pod or family of whales speaks in its own dialect and has an extraordinary lifelong bond. The idea of a captive killer whale being returned to its home waters has great scientific and emotional appeal.
Compared to the human situation, you know how many families are split apart and then rejoined by some quirk or design that brings people together in an incredibly emotional reunion.
Ascribing human emotions to animals is known as anthropomorphism. Some critics of this enormously expensive effort to return Keiko to the wild suggest that our compassion may be misguided, especially when dealing with an older whale that's relied on humans to survive for nearly 2 decades. One expert on releasing marine mammals back into the wild says Keiko is much too docile and dependent.
When I met Keiko, he came over to the side of the pool and put his head in my lap. And he looked up at me with his big brown eyes. This is not an animal behaviorally that would be a good candidate for release.
But by 1994, everyone, including Keiko's Mexican owners, agreed on one thing. Keiko needed a new home. The Mexican park gave Keiko to the Free Willy Keiko Foundation. The group had raised enough money, more than $8 million from individual and corporate sponsors, to build a new facility at the aquarium in Newport, Oregon. A facility where Keiko would no longer have to perform.
We don't do shows. None of our animals do shows. We have sea otters and seals and sea lions here, and we show them all in natural habitat.
And so in 1996, Keiko was on the road again. Hoisted in a giant sling, he was transferred from his cramped Mexican pool to a huge truck, which traveled in celebrity motorcade style to the airport, where hundreds of Mexican children had gathered to say adios. He was shipped UPS, so to speak, in a plane provided by the freight service. Keiko's arrival in Newport, Oregon was greeted with as much hoopla as his departure from Mexico, even though some residents shook their heads at the expense of it all.
That's a hell of a lot of money for one chunk of blubber.
Once lowered into his new tank, a tank 4 times the size of his former digs, an enormous cheer went up. Keiko looked a bit dazed, but those in charge of restoring him to health and teaching him survival skills were eager to get going.
We know that they spend about 95% of their time underwater, but we don't know what they're doing while they're underwater. In a tank like this, we can tell, but it's not like in the wild.
Oregon was always intended as a halfway house of sorts, a place where a killer whale could learn to be just that, a killer, a predator capable of hunting down and eating its prey. It would take 2 years of unprecedented care, unprecedented caring. Ensconced in his new and much bigger home, Keiko quickly becomes a star. Not in the world of showbiz, but in the world of science, complete with his own documentarian, Jean-Michel Cousteau.
I see here for the first time in my field a very, very unique opportunity to have such an incredible creature lead an entire movement.
The Jean-Michel Cousteau Institute, which agreed to share its video with Nightline, sees Keiko as a representative for encouraging more oceanic research, as well as for learning more about killer whales. While corporate sponsors are providing the cash for the Keiko project, Cousteau gives the initial credit to the children.
Through that extraordinary pressure, they have projected this extraordinary enterprise which Keiko is representing. But Keiko is a lot bigger than Keiko.
For the thousands of children who flock to Oregon, Keiko is big enough. Through an underwater window, they can watch his progress as trainers try to restore Keiko to health for what they hope will be his ultimate return to the open sea.
He's gained a full ton since he's been here. He weighed in at 9,620 pounds in June when they weighed him.
But simply putting on some bulk will not ensure Keiko's survival in the wild. Trainers must first teach Keiko to hunt and eat live fish.
We give him his normal dead fish as reward, then we'll do a behavior, and instead of dead fish, we'll have the other trainer introduce the live fish.
They monitor Keiko's hunting skills by way of a camera attached to his body, provided by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute.
Sometimes if they're real active, it'll take him a couple minutes to 10 minutes to track them down and get them, but he's doing really well at getting them all and nailing them all.
Keiko also learns how to pick up crabs from the tank floor, even though orcas do not eat crabs. This is more play therapy, and it shows just how gentle Keiko can be when he chooses. Will he be too gentle after all this time to be an effective predator?
There's a reason why they call them killer whales. I mean, these guys are the top of the food chain, and some of those instincts probably will come back to him when he gets into a, into a natural setting.
What used to be performance behavior in Mexico is transformed into physical therapy in Oregon. Even though it may look the same and is sometimes even accompanied by music, the goal is not to amuse spectators, but to strengthen Keiko's swimming skills and to keep him alert. Keiko can now hold his breath for up to 18 minutes, as opposed to 3 in Mexico. His skin virus has cleared up. In fact, Keiko's health is monitored 24 hours a day, complete with regular blood tests and dental hygiene. With all this personal contact, it's difficult, impossible really, for Keiko's handlers to maintain total scientific detachment.
He gave me the hardest time of any animal I've ever worked with in my life, for weeks. And, wouldn't eat for me, wouldn't swim up to the side of the pool when I was here. And so just working through that and sort of the emotion that you put into getting through that, it definitely gives you a bond.
Killer whales are extremely social animals, but for 19 years, Keiko has relied on humans for his socializing. He now must be weaned from that contact, so he'll be ready to reconnect with his own kind. And his own language. Orcas use echolocation skills, sending clicking and buzzing sounds into the water to help identify the location of solid objects. When Keiko does speak, underwater microphones are there to record it.
He'll go right over by the pickup on the hydrophone and just sit there and talk or vocalize.
But Keiko has been mostly silent in captivity because his concrete tank acts like a painful echo chamber.
Any sounds reverberates, it bounces all over. It's just like playing squash, right? It comes back at you.
All that would change, predicted Cousteau, once Keiko was transferred to the bay in Iceland.
Big difference is that here you can hear the refrigerator door slamming, you can hear the garbage truck backing up, you can hear the policeman going by. So he's going to go from a 20-year world of human sounds to nature.
He may miss the refrigerator door opening up.
No, because we'll be there to assist him if that's what's required.
In other words, moving Keiko to Iceland does not necessarily mean releasing Keiko into the wild. That final step, if it comes at all, must follow still more rehabilitation, this time in the waters he once knew as home.
When we come back, Keiko returns to his home waters, and we talk to filmmaker and naturalist Jean-Michel Cousteau.
Keiko, surely the most well-traveled marine mammal on the planet, was hoisted out of his tank in Oregon and transferred to an enormous Air Force cargo jet for the 9-hour flight to Iceland. His caretakers traveled with him, providing first-class care.
We just have to watch his respiration to make sure that, he's breathing okay and that he's hanging comfortably in the stretcher.
The plane's arrival in strong crosswinds damaged the plane's landing gear, but not the whale. He was transferred to a pen immersed in a bay not far from where he'd been captured 20 years earlier. A pen 65% larger than his Oregon tank. With a couple of kicks, Keiko was out of his stretcher and back in action, to the cheers and tears of his handlers. Those who funded this $2.5 million move were thrilled with Keiko's reaction.
His reaction is almost uncanny. You have the sense that he's home.
But he's not quite home. This pen is really just another halfway house, albeit a lot closer to freedom.
If he continues to progress as well as he has, I think that there's, every chance that he's going to make it to the next phase.
The next phase would be access into a larger enclosure, the bay outside the pen, sealed off from the open ocean by a huge net. Eventually, if Keiko learns to hunt for his own fish and depend less on humans, he might be released to the sea.
Our greatest desire would be that we can put him somehow with a pod of killer whales that will accept him and nurture him and work with him and help keep him alive.
Although Keiko has been vocalizing with other passing marine mammals, no one can predict whether he will meet the release criteria. Critics of this project argue that Keiko was never a good candidate for such an experiment.
I have serious concerns about his behavioral status, whether or not he could ever readapt to the wild and be accepted into a wild group, a wild pod of killer whales. I think he's been around man for too long. He's totally desensitized to man.
Whatever his ultimate fate, say Keiko's caretakers, his bay pen is at least an improvement over his aquarium homes. Keiko has spent the last 20 years in concrete tanks, which act like painful echo chambers. Every time he used his echolocation skills, sending out sounds to identify objects, the sounds came reverberating right back at him. In this natural environment, he'll have a chance to use those skills at last.
He's doing so well.
Meanwhile, Keiko's wealthy backers have promised to fund his care, complete with round-the-clock staff, for as long as he lives, even if he never makes that final leap to freedom. I'm Judy Muller for Nightline in Vestmannaeyjar, Iceland.
We're joined now by environmentalist Jean-Michel Cousteau, who runs the Cousteau Institute in Santa Barbara, California. He is also on the board of the Free Willy Foundation and is working on a documentary about returning Keiko to his home waters. How's he doing?
He's doing extremely well. And I'm happy to say that after about 6 weeks of being back into Iceland, Keiko is showing great improvement. He's adapting very well. And as the weather is getting worse, he is becoming more and more a wild orca, which is witnessed by the fact that he spends more and more time underwater, kind of getting a little bit away from humans.
Clearly, one of the most difficult things for Keiko will be learning how to become a hunter. He never really had a chance to learn how to do that in his youth. How's he doing in that regard?
Well, before he was moved out of Oregon, he was taught how to catch live fish, and at some point was able to eat 100% of his food out of live fish every day. Once we moved him to Iceland, we went back to a frozen diet. And I had the privilege of diving with him within the next couple days after he had been moved. And I witnessed him chasing capelins, or little fish, which were coming through the mesh and swimming into his bay pen. So you could sense that this instinct of chasing fish was still very much alive. And I believe that with time, he will be able to completely feed by himself on live fish.
As most people know, Jean-Michel, whales require oxygen, and one of Keiko's problems was he couldn't hold his breath very long. How's he doing in that regard?
Well, when he came out of Mexico and was very weak, he could only hold his breath for 3.5 minutes, which is much less than orcas in the wild. Today, he's able to hold his breath 18.5 minutes with no problem, which is precisely what other orcas do. So from that point of view, he's back to be a normal orca.
What about the business of, they have a very refined radar system which operates underwater and allows them to know where their prey is. Do you have any way of judging whether his radar system was always working, or is at least back to normal again now?
Well, there's two things happening. There's vocalization, which people would say a kind of communication system, which has been amplified and more often since he's been moved out there. There's also the echolocation, which is what you're referring to, allowing him to, without seeing anything, to identify objects, and particularly food. He is certainly echolocating now a lot more than before, because while he was in Oregon, the water in the tank was extremely clear. Today in Iceland, the water is very turbid, so vision is no longer his primary sense, which it was in captivity, and echolocation is becoming his primary sense, like it should be with wild animals.
Jean-Michel, we have only half a minute left. Of course, the big moment is going to come when you let him out into the wild again. Is there any fear that the other whales will not accept him?
I don't believe so. I think he will be accepted by other whales. We're looking for his pod. We're trying to identify them. We've sighted anywhere between 100 and 200 orcas in the neighborhood, and we're looking for his family.
Nice happy ending even without Hollywood.
I think it's going to work, Ted.
Jean-Michel, you're so nice to do this again. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.
I'll be back in a moment. And that's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.